How's everybody doing? Welcome to another video blog or another conversation piece, a discussion. Today I'm going to talk about property and why you should own a house and why it's important to own a home. This is one I got wrong for a very long time. I didn't see the reason why I should have a home, and also because I was just not really interested in um, debt. I've always been very uninterested and undesiring of having debt. That is debt to buy a house, debt to have a fridge, debt to have a house. I've always been debt averse, and because of that, I've always run away from anything that involves commitment to 24 months, 30 months, 6 months, whatever. I'm better at it now, but it was in the past I would be and I was very debt averse, and now, of course, I've learned how to use that better, but I still think I can definitely use that to a much greater effect. We'll talk about that in other videos, other discussion points, other video lectures. But in this one, I really want to talk about the value of having a house. And I got some points here I would like to highlight about why it's important based on what I discovered and what I finally came to realize about property. The first one, though, is equity, okay? Equity says basically, let's assume this book here is a house. This is the house. The house is actually three. Let's put it to four components. The physical property itself has value. The land underneath the property also has value. The determination of the value of the property depends on what the property, this physical part, the house itself, has to do with the quality of the property. How usable is it? Is it good for a family or for a single individual? What kind of people can definitely use that property determines the value of the property. So in that case, you have to look at that. If you improve the fittings, the bathtub types, the kind of windows, the carpeting, the walls, you maintain it so it's always in high quality, it's never seems shabby, the value of this property is higher than one that's not well designed, one that's not well maintained. The land underneath it depends on the other properties around you. Is there criminal activity there? Is it dirty? Is it clean? Does it have a nice view? How stable is it geology wise? How stable is it? Is there an earthquake region there? What part of the city is it in? And then that also depends on what country or what territory you're in. That's another determinant of the value of the property, which depends on, once again, the policies of the government. And also it depends on the demand and supply. How many people actually are able to buy homes in that area, and how many of them are demanding a property. That also determines the value of the property. But generally, equity means that when I buy a property, as I start paying off, it's 100% of the loan. As I pay off parts of that loan, the parts that are paid off out of that entire house's value become available to me as cash at some future point. So let's look at it as a glass. I've got a glass, like let's look at this Staples Center cup. You got this cup right here. This is the amount value of the property, 100%. As you're paying the property off, look at it as you are pouring a percentage of water into the glass. First year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year. By 20 years, you filled this cup. Equity is the amount of how much of this cup you filled that's available to you to either take as cash loan from the bank by remortgaging the property, or I can dip into whatever equity is available at that point in time to use to finance another property, or I can pull it and use it to do something else, but it's going to be charged at the value of the property or at the interest rate and charges on the property. So that's how you can view equity. We can talk about a whole session about equity, but I just want to give you a quick idea about it. The reason is you want equity. When you rent a property, the equity on the property will never accrue to you. You could rent, I've rented for over 10 years. That's 10 years. I could have half filled that glass if I had bought the property and started living in from the beginning. In fact, I'll probably almost be done paying for a property, right? So that's 10 years of equity. That's a whole cup of value that I don't get to enjoy or get to take advantage of to be able to buy another property, to be able to get education and go for a PhD, a master's, or whatever, or to be able to start a business, or be able to use to educate my kids one day, right? Because I don't have ownership of the property. So equity is the number one reason. Because whether you're renting or you're living, if you're renting a property, you are basically giving away your ability to obtain and to have equity in a property by giving it to somebody else in the form of rent. You're paying somebody else's mortgage. The years you spent in that person's property, the year you could spend 20 years, you've paid that person's entire property price, entire value of the property. All that equity has accrued to the owner of the bond. Your 20 years there means nothing because you don't have any value addition or anything on your books that allows you to take advantage of equity. So it's important that you understand that. Another part of it, let me give you another reason why equity is important. Not only are you filling up this cup, or this cup getting filled up with what you can value that you can borrow from or take from. Here's another thing. Property prices increase. So though you financed this much to get that property back in the day, this is the value of the property now. Depending on where you are, it can even be that much, right? So the property is worth 3 times more. What that means is I own a property that I paid this much for that is worth this much. Meaning not only do I have equity of the 100% I've paid off, but of the 200% increase in the value of my property. So that's why property is important. I'm looking at it from the most basic part is you can use that equity to finance and access that money. But the big thing that most people are looking for is that appreciation. The increase in the value versus what I paid for it, because land appreciates, property appreciates because nobody's making it in a factory. This is, yes, in Dubai they do make islands, but generally speaking, there's not more land being manufactured somewhere. And at the same time, more people are being born. More people are populating the earth. The cities are getting bigger. So the demand for that property you bought is going higher. The percentage of demand increase determines the appreciation. So those 2 reasons alone is one of the biggest reasons you need to buy a property. But let's break it down a little bit further. I talked to you about collateral. You can use one property to buy another property. It's like the game of Monopoly the game is called Monopoly. It's the game of Monopoly. You use one to buy the other, then 2 to buy the third, the 3 to buy the 4, then you buy the hotel. That is actually the real game in life. Monopoly is what it's about. It's about owning property and owning land. That is the truest game out there. If you own property and you own land, you are on the strongest or one of the best footings for having wealth generation and being able to be financially stable in future. It's so important to own property, so important to own land. That's why it's called wills and estates, because estates were what those people who had something left. They left land, they left it could be anything from factory land to hunting lands. And if you look at one of the richest families in the UK, their ancestor bought a large percentage of the land which London proper, the center of London, sits on. That family to this day still owns that land and is one of the richest families in the UK because of a purchase made by their great ancestor in 16 something. So you got to understand the value of land. When their ancestor bought it, there was nothing on it. There was still marshlands. It was still undeveloped. But look at it today. It's one of the most vibrant, one of the most expensive cities in the world. So they definitely made a good bet. And if you own property and you own land, you can make a great bet as well, because population always increases, and as long as the planet doesn't blow up, you've got a chance that your ancestors or your children will benefit from it. So it's collateral. It allows you to buy more properties. It allows you also to gain access to other things. There are visas in the world where you're more likely to be given a visa to visit certain countries because you own a property in the country that you're in. You're more likely to be allowed to be a permanent resident in the country that you're in because you own property there. So owning property has many benefits that you need to take advantage of. Do not sit down and say, oh, you know what value is a property to me? A property gives you legal status benefits. It gives you access to finance on the equity as well as collateral. It gives you access to visas and permits and allows you to be able to do things people without property cannot do. So very important that you have a property to access collateral. Your children, right? For those of us who want children, our children will maybe go to college, or one day when we retire or we turn to dust and this life is over for us, our kids will need a place to stay. Those parents that can leave a place for their children to stay, as in a house where their kids don't pay rent but pay for maintaining the property only and rates and taxes, those people benefit because they don't pay rent. Imagine if you didn't have to pay rent for the first 5 years of your working life or first 10 years of your working life. I can guarantee you, if I hadn't paid rent for the first 10 years of my life, I would be a multi-millionaire. I would be a multi-millionaire. That's how much money I've wasted on rent. I'll be a multi-millionaire. I will be doing very well. I'll have a very good cash position. But I'm not, because I had to pay rent. Rent is the biggest loss most of us will take. So if your kids don't have to pay rent, guess what? You have, by doing nothing else for your kids but giving them a place to stay where they don't have to pay rent, you have given them a leg up that allows them to catapult upwards on the class ladder and on the earnings ladder, especially if they're level-headed, smart children who are pushing for education, experience, and exposure, or building a business. You need to understand that is one of the most fundamental ways you can help your children, is if they don't have to pay rent. So buying a property, incredibly helpful to make your children start off at a better position in life than you started off. So that's one of the other reasons why you want a property. Now, the next one, you want to get, you can remortgage, which I spoke about in terms of taking money from the pre-existing value of the property. If it increases in value, even better. Or even if it just doesn't increase in values for over 20 years, it stays 100%, you can still take access of, you can still get money from that loan. So it's important to understand that it's very important for you to get that. Look, if I have a property worth $100,000, I can access $100,000 if that property is fully paid off, or depending on my bank's rules, 80% of the value of the property, so I can access $80,000 or $50,000, depending where you are in the world. The rules are slightly different. Now, another thing is you have control over the property. Basically, if I'm renting, guess what? The property doesn't belong to me. I don't determine what the property looks like. I don't determine the alterations I can make to the building. I don't have as much power and control. In fact, imagine I had extra land on my property that I could build apartments on and rent out to other people using the collateral or using the equity built up by my property over the first 5, 6, 7 years of me paying it off that I could build there. You won't be able to get that benefit because you don't own the property. Even if you have the idea, the landlord will use that for himself. You don't own the title deed. You won't get the benefit of it. Therefore, control is vital, and that comes via ownership and having the title deed. So you definitely want to own the property to control it. Control what you can do to make the property work for you and your family, to make it safer, to make it a better and more exciting place to live, and to make it somewhere where you get peace in life. You definitely want to control those parameters, and that requires you to understand that you need to own the property to control what you can do with the land on the property and the property itself, or change the property in the future to become something else. You add more bedrooms, or you add a swimming pool to add value to it and add usability to it, right? Next one, stability, right? You want to be stable. You want to know that I control and own this property. I won't be kicked out next week because the landlord lost his mind, or he lost all his money gambling on a camel race, and now I've got to pay his debt by being kicked out of the property. Finding another place to live is disruptive to me and my lifestyle. It's disruptive to my family. It's disruptive to my plans in life. That's why you want to own the property, so nobody can kick you out. Nobody can disrespect you. Another one is you know everything going on the property. There are many people in the world who have paid every bill that they ever got for renting a property. That is the rent, the water, electricity, rates, and taxes that were accrued to them, only to find out one day their landlord didn't pay a single cent to the people that money was supposed to go to. They show up and claim, you owe me that money, or they throw you out of the property and your life is disrupted. traumatically disrupted. You're thrown off the property, you're treated like crap, like you're a criminal, you're a thief. It happens a lot. But if you own the property, there are no fees, there are no rates and taxes you will never be unaware of, because you know what? You own the property, you know the documentation, you know the bank, and you know what's going on with your property, and nobody can show up and say anything because you know you've got control of all the important aspects that control your life, and there's no disruption. So that's vital to also understand that. Why do I want to own the property? I just don't want some douchebag showing up and throwing me out of the property because somebody offered him $1,000 extra or $500 extra, or told him, or some chick convinced him that she should let her and her friends live there, and he is smitten by her and lets her do it by throwing your family out or throwing you out of the property. So that's one of the reasons why you do not want to be in that position either. The last one is you can start off with the smallest property. Guys, understand this. You can start off with a property, look at it as rabbits. You can buy one rabbit, just two, in fact, male and female, and end up with 100 or 10,000 rabbits, depending on how many generations you wait. But that can only happen if you own the property. So don't be afraid if your income is low. If you can't afford a house in the neighborhood you want. That's always been one of my problems. I always wanted a specific kind of house, specific size, specific area. So if I couldn't afford that, I didn't bother. I didn't realize that, look, you can just buy a shack. You can just buy a little cubicle on a piece of land, or a large piece of land with a cubicle on it, and expand that cubicle as you go along. As the equity accrues, you could build upon that piece of land and get a bigger property and create the property that you're looking for. Or alternatively, you could look at it from a perspective of saying, okay, look, I'll start off with this little piece of land. Once again, monopoly. One little house. Then I'll use that little house to get a slightly larger house. Then I'll use that slightly larger house to get an even bigger house. Over 10 years, over 15 years, I will go from my little shack, my little cubicle on one little piece of land, to owning a mansion with a swimming pool and everything, because I started playing the game like I'm going up a flight of stairs. One step, one step, one step, until I get where I want to go. I want to get here, but I've got to start over here. This is how steps work in any building. You're trying to get to this point, this high point, but you start off here where you are. And because steps are like that, the reason that it's done that way is because of the amount of energy required to go from one step to the next. They designed them to require the least amount of energy to get to the top, because each step does not require that much energy to go from this level to the next level. But over time, you go a huge amount of vertical space. And that's the same way with property. You gotta look at it like the game of Monopoly. You gotta look at it like a flight of stairs or a staircase. You got to climb each stair individually, slowly, to get to the top. So those are my reasons. I think in total they're probably like 4 or 5, 6, 7. I think I probably mentioned 8 instead. But these are the reasons you want to have a property. A property is vital for wealth building, and vital for a stable life, and vital for having a retirement that is not full of financial stress. So if you don't own a property right now, look around your country, look around your city for where you can afford to buy. It doesn't matter if it's not the best neighborhood or if it's not the biggest property in the world. Owning a property would definitely leave you better off than if you don't. Even if, for instance, you bought a property and the country blew up, guess what? How are you worse off? From renting, the same thing will still happen to you, except in this case you have a title deed. So even if tomorrow the properties stagnate and you've got to sell, if the property even increased in value by 20%, you're still out for more than you put in. Or let's assume that you're in one of those markets where the values go negative, which is what people use as arguments sometimes. My question is this: will the value remain negative over the next 40 years, the next 30 years, the next 50 years? Chances are, unless it's Chernobyl, you're not likely to be in that position. There are times where there's a lull in the market where certain areas drop in value, but the value is regained over time. If you look at it as a long-term investor, not as a short-term guy who wants to get gain right now, you should generally come out either level or above in the long run. Generally, property appreciates, and because of that, you should generally, usually, statistically speaking, come out better by owning property than not owning property. Even if all that property does is at the end of the day is give your children a place to live and save from not paying rent for a period of, let's say, 5 to 10 years, however long they live in your house, while they build up equity, or rather their bank record and their cash savings to be able to afford a property elsewhere, that to me is still a big enough benefit to be worthwhile going for it, because that's going to make a huge difference to their financial futures and to their overall earnings over their lifetimes if they get that leg up. So even if all that property ever does for you is give your children a leg up on a place to stay, guess what? That is still a big enough benefit to make buying and acquiring a property right now worth it. And as I always say, this is advice that I wish I'd gotten when I was younger. I didn't get this information. I didn't get this advice. I didn't get this guidance because, hey, easily, I'm out a ton of money. I'm out a ton of wealth building. I am out of a ton of building up a better life because I didn't get this advice. This simple 20 minutes or whatever it is that I'm giving you right now could have saved me years of my life, could have allowed me to do so much more with my life to present, right? So I'm giving it to you because I don't want you to be where I was. I don't want you to be like me and be like, yo, you know what? I lost years. So, and also if you're having that debate and that question is, because the problem is, of course, in the internet, on the YouTube and other places, there's a lot of people, I don't know what their agenda is, who convince you of a whole bunch of different things. Oh, don't buy a property, or buy 50 properties, or, you know, what is it? Renting is the best deal ever. It's cheaper than a mortgage. And you're like, yes, I understand that. There are areas where renting the properties may be cheaper than the mortgage. But the fact is, like I said earlier, you don't have control. You don't have that stability. You can't leave it to your children. You don't have collateral. You don't have equity. In the short term, yes, it seems like you're winning. In the long run, you are losing. Renting never works out for you unless it's a short-term little holiday getaway or it's a place you're staying for a very short period of time. Then renting makes perfect sense. But renting for indefinite amount of time, renting for years, is not advisable at all. I've done it. I'm telling you. It's not advisable. It's not going to do anything for you. You want to get equity. You want collateral. You want that title deed that allows you to have access to certain things in life that you won't have access to if you don't have a title deed. That's what you want to do. Hopefully that helps you, a friend, a cousin. Come on, share the video with your friends. Tell your sister about it. Tell your younger brother about it. Tell your older brother about it. Tell your mother about it. Tell your father about it. If you know people that don't own property, that can't afford property, or are thinking about owning property and they're kind of hearing all these arguments about rent, maybe give them this argument. Give them this example of why you definitely want to own a property and why renting is a short-term thing always. You never rent for the long haul. You never rent for multiple years. That is not good for you and definitely not good for your pocket. All right. Until next time, guys, do more, be more, become more on your purpose.